Tell the truth, Emily Dickinson said, but tell it slant, and generations of writers traded communication for vague posting.
Are you really in a position to pick a fight with Emily Dickinson?
Oh, you know I'm not, but I'm not picking a fight with her. I'm picking a fight with a prevailing misunderstanding that incomprehensible writing is somehow good writing. And it's not. Video over.
We wish, and I know you've done this joke before, too many times before.
And it never gets old, does it?
Only because it started out old, bud. Now, did you have something else to say?
Oh yeah, in order to get students to practice the art of intentional observation, I like to give them a prompt to write about something that they haven't noticed before. It's a prompt I'm probably going to have to rewrite though, because it usually produces writing that is more trivia riddle than literature. I guess I'll take campus infrastructure for 400. Okay, here's your clue. It's dark curves, weather storm and sun, slumbering under drifts of snow or piles of petals. Students rush by unaware, but it remains resolute, ready to support those who never give thanks. Well, I guess I'll say, what is the windy road that goes up the hill? Is that your final answer? No, how about what is the handrail on the stairs at the administration building? Oh, I'm sorry. The correct answer is the armrest of the bench on the corner. Better luck next time. Now I know we think we're being very artistic when we try to evoke something without naming it, but more often than not, it kind of just ends up causing more trouble than it's worth. See, when you write a trivia puzzle instead of a poem or essay, you're creating the conditions wherein your reader has to dedicate their mental energy to figuring out the answer. But reading a piece like that and then coming to the conclusion, oh, it's an armrest for a public bench, well, that's kind of a cheap payoff. Very cool, well done, you figured out the riddle, but who cares? Because you've done some riddle-flavored vague posting, it's hard to know why any of the piece really matters. It's cool that there's some underappreciated thing that gives support, but roads and armrests give support in very different ways. So the meaning of the poem is really dependent on knowing what the piece is about. Keep it a secret or make it a riddle, and you open up the doors for readers to misunderstand the point that you're actually trying to make. Now, it's a silly question to ask what a poem means, not because poems don't have meaning, but because bad experiences in school condition us to think that there's some singular correct answer, as there would be for a trivia question or a riddle. But literature offers more interesting and complex meaning than just the answer to a puzzle. Because of that, I like to ask instead, what makes this piece meaningful? And because meaning or meaningfulness always arises from context, literary vague posting almost guarantees that whatever you have to say will, because you're artificially withholding context, fall flat. So let's make sure that that doesn't happen. And the first earth-shattering tip is just say the thing. Just say what you have to say. If you do have something to say, how does withholding it serve you or your reader? Beautiful prose will only get you so far, and readers are going to have a bad time if all you do is give them lines shorn of context. I mean, what if I give you something like this? Their soft forms, redolent with memory, sit on high. Among them, I imagine myself in distant lands, breathing what no longer is. You would be right to get a sense of nostalgia. But it's kind of just vague, uninteresting nostalgia. What are we nostalgic about? What does it matter? Who cares? But then take Mark Irwin's actual poem called My Father's Hats, and notice how the title alone snaps our understanding into place. I'll link the full version in the description, but look at even these lines. The musky scent of rain clinging to damp earth was his scent I loved, lingering on bands, leather, and on the inner silk crowns. And tell me how just saying the thing magnifies and amplifies the impact of the poem. This isn't just taking nostalgia for 300 and let's hope you can come up with what are my father's hats before the buzzer. It's a meaningful reflection on how, even after a father's death, his scent and the speaker's memories of being in their father's closet converge in the hats he left behind. Because the poet just said the thing and isn't making us figure out what it's about, we can put our mental energy into understanding the meaningful resonances that arise from that rain and damp earth scent clinging to those hats. Because the poem takes away the pressure of figuring out what it's saying, it gives us easier and deeper access to what makes it meaningful. If we go back to the charge to tell the truth but tell it slant, there's still plenty of metaphorical slant in this piece, but Irwin hasn't forgotten to tell the truth too. Too many writers commit so hard to slant that they forget the real reason for writing and reading literature. I took a fiction class once, and the teacher would sometimes encourage us to look at stories and try to account for why those stories were being told. His idea was that every story, even one with an omniscient third-person narrator, must have some reason for being, and that reason should be clear somewhere in the piece. And this gets to the other issue with the vague posted poem or story or essay. Not only is it hard to grasp the basic literal meaning, but it gets hard to see why any of it matters or why the writer thought it was worth writing. I love that you wrote that little poem about the metal armrest of the public bench, but why was that worth writing about? In addition to just saying the thing, it's also really useful to make your motive for writing about it clear. A story matters more, in other words, when we understand why someone is telling it. Take Lindsay Harding's essay, Refrigerator Elegy. It's an essay that I'll also link in the description. Most of its length is dedicated to lists of things that expire. Lettuce and kale, scallions and cilantro, refrigerator greens withering brown and wet in their crinkly clear bags if left long enough. Scalloped potatoes spotted with mold on the top shelf behind tubs of yogurt, tubs of butter and cream cheese, a dozen eggs, decorated cookies in the tin on the counter, iced and sprinkled, pressed with Hershey's Kisses, smelling of tin. I used to save every tin until I had a bin of tins. Then that bin expired. Clearly, we have no difficulty knowing what the essay is about. Harding is, in fact, just saying the thing, and we're not dealing with riddles or trivia. But you might wonder why it's worth listing things that expire. Of all the things that a person could write about, why this? Well, we get some help there too. Scattered throughout the things that expire, we also get things like nightly demands for water, for another story, another song. Stuffed animals and Barbies and plastic dinosaurs, each in their own time. The busyness we feel now, you and your siblings young but no longer babies. The little lives you live with us here in this home. Already those lives expand. How I wonder who you are. All of these are clues that the speaker is motivated not just to list stuff that expires, but to reflect on the way that kids grow up. Families change and life goes on, never to be as it was. Expiration is as much a part of life as anything else is. And Harding doesn't really say that explicitly. I'm not telling you that you need to put a thesis statement in your essay that says, I am motivated to write about all the food that goes bad in a refrigerator because I'm using it as a way to come to terms with the fact that my kids are growing up. That would ruin the piece. But in other, more thoroughly integrated ways, Harding does make it clear, not just what she has to say, but also why she wants to say it. Motive clarifies meaning. And your readers are going to appreciate your writing so much more if your motive is as clear as the literal subject of your work. Now, this isn't my first day on the job, so I know what at least some of you are probably thinking, so let's take a second to address those concerns. Often, new writers will resist the charge to abandon vague posting because they operate under the mistaken assumption that leaving things ill-defined will make them more relatable. If they don't say what their poem is about, then any reader can insert their own experience and relate to the poem that much easier. But that's counterproductive. For one, if all you're doing is giving someone a blank container that they can insert their own experience into, well then you probably don't need to spend a lot of time writing. People already have their own experiences without your empty container writing to help them. If you want something more authoritative, take it from James Joyce. For myself, I always write about Dublin, because if I can get to the heart of Dublin, I can get to the heart of all the cities of the world. In the particular is contained the universal. Joyce didn't seem to think that writing about Dublin would make it harder for someone from Chicago to relate to his work. In fact, he seemed to think the opposite. By zeroing in on the particular specifics, those more universal resonances can come forward. It might feel counterintuitive at first, but your writing will be more meaningful, more resonant, and more relatable if you actually engage with the specifics and just say the thing instead of vague posting about it. And that kind of resistance usually comes from a harmless place of inexperience. Other forms of resistance to this approach, however, come with a more insufferable attitude attached. One of them might sound something like this. I happen to know of this one obscure writer who I think is a genius, and all his books are very vague and confusing, and your advice is bad advice. Well, thanks for watching, friend, but I'd like to point out that while there are certainly some writers who have made a career of obscurity, the fact that it's your niche pick that nobody's ever heard of should be evidence enough that just saying the thing and making your motives clear are widely adopted strategies. So many people have been writing so many things for so long that you can always find a writer who does things differently. You are allowed to like niche things, But your niche thing does not invalidate broader patterns. Most writers are far more successful just saying the thing than aren't. Or maybe you're the disappointing kind of person who says something like this: "You're just encouraging people to write to the lowest common denominator. It's all slop these days, and there should be fewer writers, not more. By the way, you're the great fountain of slop." Now this one's easy to ignore because it's obviously an ego trip. But on the off chance that you're persuaded by it, let me remind you that there's a difference between things that are impossible to know anything about because the writer has artificially withheld relevant information, and things that are difficult. I'm not telling anyone to avoid difficulty. I'm telling people to give their readers all the tools they need. Just look at the so-called great literature of the past. Chaucer and Milton and Shakespeare and more are difficult, probably mostly because the language has changed since they were writing. But Chaucer's stories are very clearly about people going to Canterbury. Paradise Lost is clearly about Adam and Eve, and I don't think anybody's reading Romeo and Juliet and saying, "Wow, it sure sounds like this is a story of two star-crossed lovers, but I just can't be sure." Whatever difficulty you can attribute to those historical writers, you probably couldn't call them Vagueposters. The content and motives of their works are pretty apparent. So I'm sorry if it makes you feel like less of a privileged genius, but no, Elizabethan verse is not harder than modern poetry. It's just older. And you're allowed to prefer it, but that doesn't make you a smarter or better person. Historical writers wrote to be understood, and we should too. Call me a dunce, but I just don't understand why anyone would write and then deliberately get in their reader's way. Like, what kind of antisocial nonsense is that, really?
There's a pleasure in perverseness. I kinda get it.
Oh, you don't say? Well, here's how I think about it. Over the years of writing and seeing how people respond to my writing, I've come to understand a few things. One, no matter how careful and deliberate you are, there will always be readers who go in unpredictable directions with whatever you write. Never underestimate the reader's capacity to misunderstand. If you actually have something to say, though, why would you want a reader to misunderstand? By just saying the thing and making your motives clear, you make it harder for a reader to think you're saying something that you aren't. If you just describe disembodied smells and shapes of felt for long enough, maybe some of your readers will realize that you're writing about hats. But if you just title the poem "My Father's Hats," then there's no way your readers will miss it. You've already cut out most of the avenues for misunderstanding by just saying the thing in the title. Sometimes people will shrug off a suggestion like that and say, "I think most people will get it." And you know what? You're probably right. Most of your readers probably will. But for me, an 85% understanding rate isn't good enough. So if you can make a few simple changes to clarify your meaning and get that understanding rate up to 93%, that feels like a trade that's always worth it. And really, it can be as easy as going through a piece and seeing if there's anything you know about it that isn't actually present on the page somewhere. Do you know that the poem is about your dad's hats? Well, what do you gain by keeping that a secret? Do you know that you're writing about the stuff rotting in the fridge because you're using it as a way to process the fact that your kids are growing up? How does it strengthen your essay to hide that from everyone? If you've got something to say it. And if you let people know why you're saying it, they'll be far more likely to understand and to care about whatever's on your mind. And again, if you're not so sure, take a good hard look at most of the writing that's out there. You'll find that even if they are telling it slant, nearly every writer is still telling the truth. They're still giving the reader all the basic tools they need to understand what they have to say. Besides, actual vague posting is clickbaity and disingenuous, and nobody likes it when it happens, so don't let it take over your literary writing either. And with that, we'll call it a day. Go write clearly and meaningfully, and we'll see you next week for the start of National Poetry Month. So, not to be vague or anything, but get excited for some fun poetic things to come.
Okay, bye.